The arena roared with an energy so electric it felt like the earth itself might shake apart. Fans from every corner of the globe packed into the colossal stadium, their voices colliding in a chaotic symphony of chants, cheers, and anticipation. The lights dimmed, and for a brief moment, silence swept through the crowd, a collective breath held in awe. Then, a booming announcement echoed through the air, a single name that sent shockwaves through every heart in attendance. It was a name synonymous with precision, unrelenting grit, and the gift of gab that could set entire worlds ablaze: Conor McGregor. His entrance was pure spectacle, a collision of charisma and confidence as he strode down the walkway, emerald green lights casting a glow around his sharp features. He was the embodiment of modern combat sports, but tonight he wasn't just stepping into another fight. He was stepping into history. Across the ring stood his opponent, a man who transcended time and genre, a name that had become mythic over decades: Muhammad Ali. Dressed in his signature white robe, trimmed in gold, Ali exuded the regal poise of a king. This was the man who had conquered giants, both in and out of the ring, with fists that flew faster than the eye could see, and a mind sharper than any blade. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that Ali was not only a fighter, but a poet of movement and speech, a man who could dismantle an opponent with words before ever landing a punch. Yet tonight, there was no trash talk, no verbal warfare. His eyes held an intensity that bordered on otherworldly, as if he knew something the rest of the world didn't. This wasn't an ordinary fight. This wasn't about belts, divisions, or even rivalries. This was something far bigger, a clash of eras, styles, and legacies that no one could have imagined would ever come to life. But here they were, two legends, separated by decades, brought together by some unseen hand of fate. No one in the audience could quite understand how this moment had been made possible. Was it some futuristic simulation? A time-bending phenomenon? A twist of reality that defied all reason? None of it mattered now. What mattered was the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife, the collective pulse of millions watching from their homes, and the question burning in everyone's mind: what happens when the unshakable meets the unstoppable? As the announcer's voice bellowed their names, a stark contrast became clear. Conor's glare was sharp and calculating, his movements a study in controlled chaos. Ali, on the other hand, moved with a fluid grace, a calmness that seemed unshaken by the enormity of the event. It was as if he'd already fought and won this battle 1,000 times in his mind. The referee called them to the center, and for a brief moment, the two men stood inches apart, locked in a silent stare. It wasn't just a face-off, it was a conversation, unspoken but powerful, where respect and defiance intertwined. The bell hadn't even rung, yet the fight had already begun in the hearts and minds of everyone watching. Commentators scrambled to make sense of the spectacle unfolding before them. Could McGregor's razor-sharp precision and unpredictable striking overcome the sheer artistry and finesse of Ali? Would Ali's ability to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee overwhelm the raw ferocity and modern techniques that McGregor brought to the table? These were the questions dominating every discussion, but the answers seemed impossibly out of reach. Time itself felt as if it had slowed when the bell finally rang. Conor stepped forward, his movements light and calculated, a predator testing his prey. Ali mirrored him, his footwork as mesmerizing as a dance, gliding across the ring with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. The first jab came from Ali, a flash of motion so quick that even McGregor's renowned reflexes barely managed to react. But the Irishman smiled. He wanted this. He thrived in chaos, and this was exactly the kind of challenge he lived for. The first exchange was a storm of feints, counters, and rapid-fire strikes that left the audience breathless. Each fighter revealed glimpses of their mastery, Ali's jab snapping like a whip, McGregor's left hand cocked and ready to fire, like a loaded gun. It was a collision of philosophies as much as fists, a battle where brute force alone would never be enough. But something strange was happening, something no one could quite put into words. As the fight unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just about who would land the knockout punch or who would outlast the other. It was as if the ring itself had become a stage for something far greater, a reflection of human willpower, ingenuity, and the unyielding desire to be remembered. It wasn't just Conor and Ali fighting anymore. It was every fighter who had ever dared to dream, every fan who had ever been inspired by their courage, every underdog who had ever faced impossible odds. And then it happened, a moment so stunning, so utterly inexplicable, that it brought the entire stadium to its feet. Conor stepped into the center, his eyes burning with determination, and for a split second, Ali hesitated. Was it respect? Was it strategy? Or was it something else entirely? The crowd erupted, their voices rising to a deafening crescendo as the unthinkable began to unfold. The hesitation was brief, so fleeting that most in the crowd might not have noticed it at all, but to those who lived and breathed the art of combat, it was a moment of profound significance. Ali's hand, poised for a strike, held its position for a fraction longer than expected. It wasn't hesitation born of fear or uncertainty. No, it was something far deeper, like an acknowledgement of the storm gathering before him. Conor seized the moment, closing the distance with a precision so sharp, it felt like time itself had bent to his will. The crack of his left hand connecting with Ali's guard echoed through the stadium, a sound that sent a ripple of shock and excitement through the audience. But Ali didn't falter. His counter was instant, a combination so fluid, it looked effortless: jab, hook, jab. The rhythm of his punches was mesmerizing, a symphony of movement that left even Conor, the king of mind games and chaos, briefly on the back foot. Yet, as they traded blows, it was clear this wasn't just a fight for supremacy. This was a conversation between two eras, two philosophies, each testing the limits of the other. Conor's relentless aggression and modern techniques met Ali's timeless grace and adaptability, and the clash was nothing short of art. As the first round unfolded, the tension in the air only thickened. Ali began to find his rhythm, his footwork painting invisible lines across the canvas as he danced circles around McGregor. But Conor, ever the tactician, wasn't chasing him blindly. He was studying, waiting, and recalibrating with every passing second. The crowd roared at every feint, every near miss, as if their collective energy could tilt the balance in favor of their chosen fighter. What the audience couldn't see, however, was the weight each man carried into this fight. Ali wasn't just fighting for his legacy, he was fighting for the ideals he had always stood for: perseverance, freedom, and the belief that even in the face of insurmountable odds, the human spirit could prevail. For Conor, the stakes were just as high, though entirely different. This wasn't about proving himself as the greatest, it was about transcending the sport, about showing that he could step into a realm of legend and hold his own. But beneath the surface, an even greater mystery was brewing, one that neither fighter nor spectator could ignore. How had this fight come to be? Whispers had circulated for weeks before the event, rumors of cutting-edge technology or shadowy organizations pulling the strings behind the scenes. Some said it was a scientific breakthrough, a merging of past and present through some unfathomable advancement in quantum mechanics. Others believed it was something more mystical, a ripple in time that had brought these two titans together. The fighters themselves had remained tight-lipped, focused only on the task ahead, but the question lingered in every corner of the arena. What forces had conspired to make this dream match a reality? In the second round, the fight took an unexpected turn. Ali, who had seemed untouchable in the first, began to show subtle signs of vulnerability. A slight drop in his guard, a momentary misstep, nothing glaring, but enough for someone as sharp as Conor to notice. McGregor pressed the advantage, his strikes coming faster and harder. Each one aimed not just at winning the fight, but at breaking through the enigma of Ali's composure. Yet, with every strike landed, Ali responded with a counter that spoke of his resilience and depth of experience. It was a battle of wills as much as skill, and neither man was willing to give an inch. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, tension was brewing among the event staff. In the control room, technicians and coordinators exchanged uneasy glances as data streams flickered across their screens. Something was off. The fight was progressing in ways no one had anticipated, as if the very fabric of the event was shifting beneath their feet. One of the analysts, a man with decades of experience in combat sports simulations, muttered under his breath, "This wasn't supposed to happen." His colleagues looked at him, confused and alarmed, but before they could press him for answers, the live feed crackled and distorted for a brief second, a glitch that sent a wave of panic through the room. Out in the arena, the fighters were oblivious to the chaos brewing in the background. Conor pushed forward with the ferocity of a man, determined to shatter expectations, while Ali's movements grew more intricate, as if he were weaving a narrative with every step and strike. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, their cheers blending into a single deafening roar that filled the cavernous space. It was no longer about who would win. It was about witnessing something that felt larger than life, a moment that would be etched into the collective memory of all who watched. And yet, as the seconds ticked by, a strange unease began to settle over the arena. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, an almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. The fighters paused briefly during a clinch, their eyes locking for a split second, as if they both felt it too. It wasn't fear or confusion, but an unspoken understanding that something beyond their comprehension was unfolding. The round ended with neither man gaining a clear advantage, but the tension had reached a boiling point. As they returned to their corners, their faces bore expressions not of exhaustion, but of anticipation, as if they knew the fight was building towards something extraordinary. The crowd's cheers turned to murmurs as they too felt the shift, an almost primal instinct warning them that the night's greatest revelation was yet to come. In the control room, the glitch returned, this time more pronounced. Screens flickered and went dark before rebooting with strange, unrecognizable symbols replacing the usual data. The lead technician's voice trembled as he whispered, "What have we done?" But before anyone could respond, the feed stabilized and an automated voice echoed through the room. "Event anomaly detected. Prepare for contingency protocol." Back in the ring, the fighters stood ready for the third round, their eyes locked with an intensity that bordered on otherworldly. The referee raised his hand to signal the start, but before the bell could ring, the lights in the arena flickered and dimmed. A hushed silence fell over the crowd, a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the very air. And then, from the depths of the darkness, a voice that was neither human nor machine spoke a single chilling sentence that reverberated through the arena. The arena fell into a stunned silence, the voice reverberating through every corner like a ghostly echo. It wasn't the voice of a commentator, nor a malfunctioning announcement system, it was something else entirely. The fighters stood frozen in the ring, their expressions locked in a mix of confusion and defiance. Conor's eyes darted around the darkened arena, his sharp instincts on high alert, while Ali's gaze remained steady, calm in a way that felt unnervingly resolute. The crowd, once deafening, now sat in collective shock, whispers rippling through the stands like a restless wave. Something was happening, something that no one, not even the masterminds behind this unprecedented event, had anticipated. Before the silence could stretch too long, the lights flickered back on, brighter and more intense than before. But they didn't bring comfort. Instead, the arena was bathed in an unnatural glow, as if reality itself had shifted slightly out of sync. The referee looked around nervously, his hand hesitating to signal the next round. Then, without warning, the ring itself began to change. The ropes shimmered, their fibers twisting into a metallic sheen, and the mat beneath the fighters' feet seemed to ripple like water. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the boundaries of the ring dissolved, leaving the fighters standing on a surface that looked endless, a shimmering expanse of white that seemed to stretch into infinity. Conor took a cautious step back, his fist still raised, ready for whatever came next. Ali, however, remained rooted to the spot, his expression unreadable. It wasn't fear, nor surprise. It was as if he had been expecting this. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Conor's with a look that carried an unspoken warning. Stay sharp. This isn't over. In the control room, chaos erupted. Technicians scrambled to make sense of the data streaming across their monitors, which now displayed incomprehensible symbols interlaced with distorted images of the ring. One of the analysts slammed his headset down, his voice trembling. This wasn't part of the program. We didn't build this. Another technician, pale and wide-eyed, pointed at a screen where fragments of text appeared in rapid succession. You thought you controlled this. But this is beyond control. Meanwhile, in the ring, or whatever the ring had become, Conor's instincts kicked in. What's going on here? He barked, his voice carrying a sharp edge of defiance. He glanced at Ali, whose stance hadn't shifted. You know something, don't you? Conor demanded, his tone accusatory yet tinged with curiosity. Ali's response was measured, his voice calm yet filled with an unshakable authority. I know as much as you do, son. But I've learned one thing in this life: when the unknown comes knocking, you don't panic. You move. Before Conor could respond, the shimmering expanse around them rippled, and a sound like distant thunder filled the air. From the endless white, figures began to emerge, not spectators, not officials, but shadowy shapes, their forms shifting and indistinct. They moved like specters, silent and deliberate, circling the fighters as if studying them. The crowd, still visible but seemingly detached from this new reality, screamed and pointed, their terror palpable even from the other side of the shifting boundary. The first shadow lunged toward Ali, and in an instant he sprang into action. His movements were as precise and graceful as they'd been in his prime. But there was an urgency now, a ferocity that hinted at something deeper. He struck the shadow with a perfectly timed combination, and for a moment the figure faltered, its form dissolving into a cascade of light before reforming, stronger and more defined. Conor wasted no time joining the fray. With a swift pivot, he delivered a spinning back kick that sent another shadow recoiling, but like Ali's opponent, it reassembled almost instantly. What are these things? Conor shouted, his voice strained as he dodged a strike from one of the figures. Ali, still moving with the fluidity of a man born for battle, called back, "Does it matter? Fight like your life depends on it, because it just might." As the two fighters worked together to fend off the advancing shadows, something began to change. The figures grew more aggressive, their strikes faster and more coordinated, as if they were adapting to the fighters' every move. But it wasn't just the shadows that were changing. Conor and Ali were too. With every punch, every dodge, their movements became sharper, their reactions quicker, as if the challenge itself was pushing them to new heights. It was a strange paradox. The harder the fight became, the more alive they seemed. Back in the control room, the lead technician stared at the screens in horrified awe. "They're evolving," he murmured, his voice barely audible. One of his colleagues turned to him, panic etched across her face. "What do you mean, evolving? The fighters or the things?" The lead technician hesitated, his eyes locked on the data streaming before him. "Both," he finally said. "This isn't just a fight anymore. It's a test." The word hung in the air like a death knell, but no one could explain what it meant or who was behind it. All they knew was that the fight had spiraled far beyond anything they could have anticipated, and the boundaries of reality itself seemed to be unraveling. Back in the ring, the tension reached a breaking point. Conor and Ali, now fighting side by side, exchanged a brief glance, one filled with mutual respect and an unspoken understanding. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. Whatever this was, it was bigger than both of them, bigger than the sport, bigger than the event. It was as if the universe itself had thrown them into a crucible, testing not just their physical limits, but the very essence of who they were. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the assault stopped. The shadows retreated, their forms dissolving into the endless white, until nothing remained but the fighters and the empty expanse. Conor, breathing heavily, turned to Ali. "What now?" he asked, his voice laced with exhaustion and frustration. Ali didn't answer immediately. He looked around the expanse, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon, as if searching for something. Finally, he spoke, his tone grave yet resolute. "We wait." But the stillness didn't last long. From the void, a figure began to emerge, its form clearer and more defined than the shadows before. This one wasn't like the others. It was solid, real, and it radiated a presence that made the air around it feel heavy. As it stepped closer, its face came into focus, and the crowd's collective gasp echoed faintly from the other side of the boundary. It was a face neither fighter could have expected, yet one that changed everything. The figure stepped forward, its every movement deliberate, exuding an authority that silenced even the whispers of the crowd on the other side of the fading boundary. Conor and Ali, battle-worn but unyielding, watched as the form solidified into something unmistakably human yet eerily otherworldly. It was a man, but not just any man. His presence felt timeless, as if he had stepped out of history and into the fabric of the present. The collective gasp from the crowd was matched by the fighters' stunned expressions. It wasn't just a stranger. It was someone they both recognized, though neither dared to speak his name. The man, regal and composed, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of wisdom and power, stopped a few paces away, his gaze shifting between the two fighters. He smiled faintly, though it carried no warmth. "You've done well," he said, his voice resonating through the expanse like the toll of a distant bell. "Better than expected." Ali took a cautious step forward, his fists still raised, his expression unreadable. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady but laced with the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. Conor, ever the firebrand, cut in with a sharp tone. "And what's the point of all this? If you dragged us here for some kind of show, you've got our attention. Now what?" The man chuckled softly, a sound that somehow felt both soothing and sinister. "You misunderstand," he said. "This isn't about you, or at least not in the way you think. This was never about a fight. This was a demonstration. Proof of concept, if you will." "Proof of what?" Conor shot back, his frustration barely contained. The man's gaze settled on him, piercing and unyielding. "Proof," he said slowly, "that humanity's greatest strength lies not in its technology, its progress, or even its intellect, but in its spirit. In its capacity to adapt, to rise, to fight against all odds. You, both of you, embody that truth. The worlds beyond this one will need to understand that. And now they will." Before either fighter could respond, the expanse around them began to ripple again, the shimmering white dissolving into a cascade of colors. The shadows returned, but this time, they didn't lunge or attack. Instead, they knelt, forming a circle around the fighters and the man. It was as if they were acknowledging something greater, something they could no longer challenge. The man turned to the kneeling figures, his expression one of solemn authority. "You've seen enough," he said, his voice commanding yet calm. "Now you understand." The shadows dissolved one by one, leaving the fighters and the man standing alone. Ali glanced at Conor, his brows furrowed in thought. "You feel it, don't you?" he said quietly. Conor nodded, his usual bravado tempered by the weight of the moment. Yeah, he replied. It's like, this isn't just about us. It's bigger. The man stepped closer, his expression softening just slightly. You're both right, he said. This was never just about the fight. It was about showing what's possible when two forces seemingly opposite come together. It's about unity, resilience, and the will to overcome. But your roles here are done. He raised a hand, and the air around them shimmered again. The crowd's cheers, faint and distant, began to grow louder as the boundaries between the expanse and the arena started to blur. What happens now? Ali asked, his voice calm but firm. The man's faint smile returned. Now, you go back. The world will remember this as a fight for the ages, and it will inspire those who watch it. But the true purpose, that will remain hidden, at least for now. You've played your part. The rest is yet to come. With a wave of his hand, the arena snapped back into focus. The ropes, the mat, the roaring crowd, everything returned, as if nothing had happened. The fighters stood in the center of the ring, the referee looking as confused as the spectators, who erupted into cheers once again. Conor and Ali exchanged a glance, their expressions heavy with unspoken understanding. Whatever they had experienced, whatever truths they had glimpsed, it was something only they would carry. The referee stepped forward, raising his arms to signal the continuation of the match. But before he could speak, Conor's voice echoed through the arena. It's over, he said, lowering his fists. The crowd fell silent, their cheers dying in an instant. Ali nodded in agreement, lowering his own guard. There's nothing left to prove, he said simply. The referee hesitated, glancing between the two fighters, then raised both their arms in unison. The crowd erupted, their confusion giving way to a wave of admiration and awe. The fight was declared a draw, but everyone watching knew they had witnessed something far greater than a contest.